The first 90 seconds of your podcast are make or break. This is when listeners are deciding, do I care? Does this matter to me? And do I even trust the person who I'm listening to? And if your listeners answer no to any of those questions, sweetie, we have a problem. And guess what? You're doing this right now while you're listening to me. And here's the good news. Once you know how to structure a podcast intro well, then you can get people to listen to your episode for a lot longer. And if you're new here, welcome. My name's Huete. I'm a podcast producer. I've made shows like Where Should We Begin with Esther Perel, or Together Apart with Priya Parker, or shows like This Is Dating, which was listed as one of Time Magazine's best podcasts of 2022. And here are a whole host of other shows that I have worked on. And before I became a professional producer, I, like you, was an independent podcaster. And that is exactly why I created the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator for brilliant people with great ideas who just feel like maybe they're not sure if their idea is good enough, or they feel afraid about really embarking on a journey where they don't know every single step of what it takes to really make a show that shines, that connects to an audience, and actually makes an impact. And my goal for you as a podcaster is for you to build your thought leadership so that eventually, if you want to be a speaker, if you want to make money doing this, you can. And first, before we get to that, we got to make a show that people love listening to. All right, so let's get into how you structure your podcast intro. The very first part of your podcast intro is what we call a hook. This is the first 30 seconds of your podcast, and this is maybe the most critical part of your intro. Now, I'm sure you've heard of hooks before. People talk about writing viral hooks all the time. You use a hook in a YouTube video, in an Instagram video, in a TikTok, and the same thing is true for a podcast. Now, here are 5 formats for hooks that tend to work really well for engaging an audience. The first is to ask a really engaging question. Something like, would you forgive your best friend if their secret cost you your career? And if this is relevant to your audience, they're going to be like, I don't know. And it's that tension or the want to answer that question that is going to keep them engaged. And someone who does this really well is Mel Robbins. She'll often ask a question like, are you ready to leave behind the identity that no longer serves you so that you can become the person you've always wanted to be? If you're her people, you're going to be like, actually, yes, I'm ready for that. And that is what's going to keep you hooked and keep you listening. The second format is to make a bold statement. So saying something like, everything taught about productivity in school is a lie. True innovation comes from chaos. Now, I don't actually know if this is that bold of a statement, but if you make a bold statement that your listener really cares about, then they are much more likely to truly continue engaging and wanting to listen to why this is true or want the deeper explanation of why this is the case. The third format is a surprising fact. Something like 70% of CEOs do not believe they're actually qualified for their job. Is that true? I don't know if that's true, but if that is true, I really want to understand why that is the case, okay? So 3 is a surprising fact. And number 4 is a powerful line from your guest. So you would go through your actual interview with your guest and you would pick 1 or 2 really powerful statements that were made. And you would use that, you would pull that clip and play it at the very beginning. So maybe they said, I just realized I wasn't broken. I was simply burnt out and I needed to restructure how I thought about work versus life. And if this is a thing that you cover on your episode, and if this is the core of what gets at what makes this episode interesting, then your listeners are hooked and they're gonna keep listening. The 5th format is a mini story. Something like, he locked the door, hands trembling. I realized that in this moment, what we chose to do could cost us everything. And actually, we used to use this format a lot when I was working on Where Should We Begin. If you go and listen to those episodes, you will essentially hear a mini story at the beginning of the episode. And then in the actual episode, you hear a couple sitting through couples therapy. But before you go into that, you have to hear a little bit of what their story is. And then you can go into the meat of the actual interview. And here's the interesting thing. These are 5 formats for you to consider just so that your brain has a list of ways to think about this, but actually you can mix and match a lot of these different formats together. The person who's the king of this is Stephen Bartlett. On his podcast, Diary of a CEO, he will ask a really intense question, and that will be paired with a really powerful line from the guest during the interview, and they'll leave you with a cliffhanger.
I followed society's version of money until I realized that if I continue living this way, the freedom, the choice, the options that I want aren't going to exist. Hold on, give me a second.
And that is what compels you to want to answer how that cliffhanger ends. That's why you continue listening to the episode. So that's your hook, your first 30 seconds. And here's a pro tip. You don't want to start by writing your hook. You actually want to record your actual episode first and then work on your hook last. This is just like, remember when we used to write term papers in school? You would write your term paper and then you would come back and work on your introduction. This is true in podcasting. Do not worry about your hook until after you've recorded your episode. So the second part of your intro is your show ID. All right. So this is really quick, 1 to 2 sentences max. And the purpose of this is if in the first 30 seconds you hooked your audience, you captured their attention, your purpose right now is to ground them. So tell them who they're listening to and where they're at. Like, what is this show really about? So when we were making This Is Dating, we would often say something along the lines of, from the producers of Where Should We Begin, this is Dating, a show where you listen in on couples' first dates. I'm Huete. So what's happening there is the credibility piece comes from you knowing what other show we've worked on. So if you like Where Should We Begin, you are very likely to trust us and to want to listen to this show. And we tell you exactly what this show is. It's a show where you listen in on couples' first dates. And you'll notice that because my credibility is built into the front end, I don't tell you exactly who I am and why I'm a credible source to listen to. I just tell you I'm Huete. That's by design because you don't really need to know a lot about me. This show is not about me. This show is actually about the daters whose first dates you will listen to. So if you need a template for yourself, it sounds something like this. Welcome to your show name, where we explain the mission of your show very quickly. I'm your name, and I explain what makes you credible to be hosting this show. Now you might be feeling like, snap, I don't know what makes me credible to host this show. This is a fear that comes up with so many of the podcasters that I work with. And the truth is your lived experience, your curiosity, your questions, all of that is part of what makes you credible. So if you're the friend who asks the hard questions, your intro could be as simple as, welcome to show name, where we explain what you guys do, and then say, I'm Huete, the friend that isn't afraid to ask the hard questions. That's it, right? And of course, if you have a level of expertise which is going to be pertinent to this episode or to this show, then you should absolutely tell us about that. But it can be as simple as what it is that makes you different from what you see on other podcasts, okay? And the other piece is sometimes people have the credibility, but they're really afraid of bragging. And I want you to reframe that. It's not bragging, it's just context. It's telling people who you really are so that they don't have to wonder and guess what your background and your story is. The third part of your intro is the problem setup. So this is usually where I see so many podcasters go wrong because they start the small talk or the rambling and the chit chat. But at this point, your listener is still deciding whether they're really going to keep listening to your episode. So instead of chatting, you should be setting up the problem that this episode is going to be solving, okay? And you do that through 3 very clear questions that you should be answering. The first is, what is the problem that we're going to be exploring here? The second is, why does this matter to your listener? And third, what's in it for them if they stick around? So let's keep using This Is Dating as an example. In one of our episodes, which was one of my favorite episodes, we were exploring the concept of chemistry. It was me and a co-host, and we were chatting about what does chemistry actually mean? Is it even a real thing, or have we as a society made it up? Okay, so that is us introducing the problem that we're going to be exploring in this episode. The second part of it is, why does this matter to the listener? And I think I said something along the lines of, sometimes I think chemistry is just us mistaking our anxiety as connection with someone else. And my co-host disagreed, right? So we are setting up, all right, you should probably understand what chemistry is, and it matters to you because you might think you have chemistry with someone when really it's just your anxiety. And then the third part is what happens if they stick around, right? So we say something along the lines of, in this episode, you're going to listen to Virginia going on a date, and she is really concerned about making sure she has chemistry with whoever she goes out with. Let's see how that really works out for her. So we're not giving you the answer, but we're telling you we're going to be exploring this concept of chemistry together. And by the end, we will be able to make up our opinions. You as the listener and us as the host will be able to make up our opinion on what chemistry really is and how that applies to our individual lives. And by the way, I walked away from that episode believing that chemistry is real. But I do actually think a lot of people confuse anxiety for chemistry. Don't get at me. I'm just telling you what the research has told me, okay? Now, let's get into the final piece that you need to master for your intro. Now, the final piece to your podcast intro is music placement. Now, this is one that trips a lot of the podcasters I work with up because they feel like, I don't know when to introduce it, is it too loud, etc. And I'm going to give you one simple tip that I use for myself, and then you can tweak it to make sure it makes sense for you. The general rule I use is introduce your music after your hook and let it go softer under your show ID and your intro, and then fade it out before your episode begins. I do this and I'm very mindful of how loud the music is so that it's not competing with your show ID and your intro. And sometimes I'll add a couple seconds of quiet between the hook and the show ID so that the music has some time to come in. Okay, so I'll just repeat that one more time. You have your hook, couple seconds where the intro music comes in, and then you keep it low as your show ID and your problem is being set up, and then you fade it out as you transition into your episode. If you've loved this video, you will really appreciate this video on how to write a script for your podcast. And if you found all of this helpful and you'd like to work with me in the Emerging Voices Accelerator, I really encourage you to start by downloading the 10-step guide to launching your podcast. It'll enroll you into my mailing list, and you will be the first to know when applications are open for new students. I will see you in the next video.